Champagne is a story in itself. A story in which a wine travels the world in just a few centuries to build a fabulous destiny. A unique wine. A wine of sensations, of shared pleasures. An essential and universal wine. A wine that allowed itself to be invented, mastered, and desired by exceptional men who share an affinity for the earth and of commerce, a taste for innovation and daring. Men whose influence you can still feel in today's champagne houses after 3 centuries spent creating this legendary wine. Its history rooted in the choices of its original visionaries, a legend that grew through the talent of its creators, and which is inherent in the land that provides the setting for this epic tale. At the heart of Europe, the Champagne region is a market land. It has been renowned since the Middle Ages for the importance of its great fairs, from which links with the northern countries were born through its fabric trade, which also built the reputation of Reims. The land was worked by the monks, who along with the local gentry, helped develop the dynamism of a vineyard, which participated in the great works of the Middle Ages, a respected vineyard near the capital, which traded in wine.
Two main markets were recognized as soon as the Middle Ages. On the one hand, the northern countries, those that did not have wine, Flanders, England, and on the other hand, Paris, the Parisian gullet. And in those markets, there was competition. Competition from the Burgundy wines on the one hand, competition from the Loire wines on the other. A way of surviving needed to be found. The qualitative leap came a bit before or a bit after 1700 and occurred with the production of white wine from black grapes, what we call grey wines.
This initiative of the Champagne region brings quality and caters to the changing tastes and dining culture of the elite and the general image of wine.
White wine is the wine of the beautiful people. Red wine is the wine of the working classes.
The European elite largely prefer white wines. And so there was a production of white wine in the Champagne region which is impossible to quantify, but which had a good reputation, especially the wine of Aï, known as a white wine in the 1650s.
L'astuce des Champenois
where the Champagne people were smart was that they heightened the taste from what was still an oddity. They managed to produce a product with its own quality and which allowed them to distance themselves from the competition.
This individual identity comes from a slight effervescence featured in the Champagne wine.
It was in fact known as Lord Firecracker in the 13th century, this devil wine, a disconcerting phenomenon that no one knew how to handle.
At that point it was considered as a flaw in the wine and was even a cause for sales to be cancelled. Fizzy wines are not much valued. Consumers consider that it is a fault with the product because it's something that occurs after the sale.
This light effervescence is much appreciated by the French court and the English nobility, who were refugees for a time in Paris and who will introduce this fizzy wine, discovered on the tables of French aristocrats such as the Marquis of Sillery, to the new English court.
This wine that is seen as sophisticated is now associated with the elite.
An analogy is made between the fizz of the wine and the sparkle of the human spirit. It was a theme that was already present during the 16th century and in ancient history. Wine, good wine, is the wine that delivers good verses to poets and what's more, in a slightly mystical way, helps us to discern the good poets from the bad.
The effect of fashion will bring this wine to the whole of Europe, a fashion that will bring about the trade of sparkling wines from Champagne.
In the 1710s, 1720s, the bottled wine market is a micro market. It represents a few thousand bottles in the 1720s, around 50 or 60,000 bottles, and they are being sold in the abbeys. Dom Pérignon sold bottled wines in the 1690s. There is evidence of this. Bertin de Rocheret is a broker who sells wines in barrels and who on occasion delivers wines in bottles.
And there are a number of aristocrats. This is a possibility, thanks to certain families, to penetrate the world of the courts and win over a clientele which has a strong potential for demand, as was remarked at the time.
The champagne quality is growing in stature and can be found at places such as the cellar of the Hauteviller Abbey, Dom Pierre Perignon, who contributes to this new movement.
Dom Perignon, widely recognized for his part in this story, was clearly at the heart of the greatest enological progress made at the time. After all, it's with him that come the first mentions of reason blending. A text tells us that at first it was by tasting the grapes, and then by tasting the musts or clear wines to arrive at a balance.
He is recognized as having the ability to produce the clearest wines. Therefore, he brought two main things to winemaking, what we call skillful blending, and then there are wine clarification methods that he put in place on quite a grand scale.
The business of champagne is quite audacious, as you must know how to master its moods and run the risk of unpredictable and costly development. But its attractions come from its restrictions. It draws experienced men who already work in the wine, wool or fabrics trade.
What is progressively going to happen is that the traders are not only going to take charge of the commercial network, but also the production.
And some brokers, such as Mouette, are going to quietly transform from brokers to traders by storing more and more wines. And the bottling of wine will of course accelerate this evolution, since these wines require a period of storage. They are wines that aren't sold before 1 year.
The bottling of champagne is key. It will determine its trade. The Champagne Wine Producers Initiative will be the start of a new way of consuming wines.
Champagne would not have existed without the bottle. Champagne is the result of the bottle and the cork.
It's a fundamental innovation. The idea to put wine in bottles to preserve it is a relatively foreign concept to wine cultivation before the start of the 18th century, as wine is preserved in barrels. Bottles are not only a technical evolution, they're actually a cultural revolution for wine consumption, as it allows individual consumption. It's impossible to have a collection of wine barrels from around the world, as the barrels do not travel well. But from the 1760s, 1770s, all the great French noblemen practically have the whole winemaking world in their cellars thanks to bottles.
Champagne is then served at dinners and becomes a part of the custom. It becomes the wine of the great and their courts.
There is an extremely important phase in the history of Champagne, the Regency period, a more relaxed era that develops after the death of Louis XIV, this change of fashion, the appearance of fine dining, of a certain gallantry, where this wine with a popping cork fits in perfectly.
The etiquette of champagne is universal. It's an aristocratic product at a time when aristocracy is looking towards Europe and the champagne wine. It's the natural drink for European aristocrats to enjoy who don't just drink champagne, but know them all. In the travels of Casanova in the 1740s, 1750s, you can see he drank champagne everywhere. It's the only drink he drank in all the countries he visited.
Louis XV serves it at his table and honors it with a painting. It delights the heart of the Marquis of Pompadour, and Florent Louis Heidsieck will offer this wine that she appreciated so much to Marie Antoinette. It's the wine of the elite, a rare and expensive wine. The wine of lights, a wine with a novelty that's a whole experience, an expression. Champagne is born.
The cork is popped as high as possible because of the novelty, and it is also poured from very high into the glasses to highlight the effervescence, which today would be a very dangerous thing to do.
It's indeed the wine of the elite, the aristocracy, and you must never forget this, because even today it of course symbolizes luxury. It symbolizes pleasure, but it symbolizes luxury.
I really like the champagne ritual, Firstly, from a purely aesthetic point of view, there is no wine more beautiful. The golden colour of champagne is a golden colour you don't find in the other white wines. I also love the wonderful noise, the noise of champagne, starting with the popping of the cork. It's a wonderful noise.
It's not just a wine for quaffing or for the aperitif. It's a complete wine, complex, creative, a wine that has its own importance, which has an essential importance in tasting and with meals. The day you are lucky enough to dip your lips into champagne, a special moment is created, a moment of pleasure that you of course try to replicate throughout your life, because it is such a special moment.
There is no substance in the world that offers so much exaltation as champagne.
This wine, which is so popular, will be the work of the men of Champagne. They created their companies, will take the risks that come with this budding trade. They will be the pioneers.
They have distanced themselves from the generic wine market. They were new creators, discoverers, inventors.
Their distinguishing feature, as we know, was to be traders, be it traders in fabrics, in wool, or in other activities, used to going to the great European fairs, and were certainly entrepreneurs. And so, as is the case with every entrepreneur, there was some risk-taking that they were brave enough to take. But once again, because they felt they had in their hands a product that was completely incomparable, and at the same time, with no competition whatsoever, at least in Europe.
From now on, they will produce this wine that the monks and noblemen no longer produce, gone after the revolution. Champagne companies are invented, such as the illustrious Jean-Remy Moët.
He very quickly saw that a company needed to be created, a sizable industrial tool to be able to deliver to the markets he was creating.
And he also created the organization's rules.
This is where we start to see this vertical organization of the Champagne Company, with its wine cellars, wine warehouses, and all the labeling and shipping premises.
He concerned himself very much with the quality of his wines, but he also concerned himself very much with his clientele.
Above his cellars, he had created an exceptional tool, which we would call a PR tool today, to welcome his guests and serve them champagne dinners. His acquaintance with the emperor, who came several times to Épernay whilst Jean-Remy Moët was also the mayor, ensured his brand quickly became well known.
And it's probably this link between the attention he gave to his clients, to their expectations and their desires, and the technical developments that he manages to put into place in his cellars. The mix of those two factors gave him the importance he had in the Champagne region.
The Champagne companies invent their tools. They must first master the quality of this wine that requires many operations and lots of space. They make large investments in big cellars, which allow them to control the temperature of the wines and make progress in the quality of the champagne and its bottles by limiting bottle breakage.
The bottle is a container, but also allows its development. It's completely different to other wines, Burgundies or Bordeaux. The bottle, too, is a tool.
Production volumes soar. From 500,000 bottles before the revolution, the champagne houses reached production levels 5 times higher at the end of the empire.
As paradoxical as it may seem, the fall of the empire was also a positive event, because the occupation of France at that time by what was then called the Allies, and particularly the Russians in the Champagne region, gave them a taste for a wine they could no longer live without. As soon as the hostilities ended, the agents of the Champagne companies rushed to St. Petersburg, Berlin, Vienna.
The commercial travellers are the representatives of the Champagne Company abroad. They have the full trust of their directors, and they apply the same rules, as we'd say today, as the company for which they were working abroad.
And in this quite commercial universe, the Veuve Clicquot company found the rare jewel, Louis Beaune, who is an extremely selfless traveller, who travelled for a long time, who won over the trust of the Clicquot widow, who was widowed at a very young age, and who found this extraordinary commercial traveller, who was very thrifty, but also very persuasive with the traders.
This multilingual man who speaks German, the language of commerce at that time, will travel around Europe. The Clicquot family send him to London, then Amsterdam, Germany, and the whole of Eastern Europe up to Russia for him to establish his networks, set up the company. Like the other commercial travelers, he roams incessantly, sends back orders, and takes down clients' comments so the company can cater to their tastes.
Traveling around Europe in conditions that were physically much more difficult than today, and especially collecting money, having trust between people. But this trust created a network, and it's the personalized commercial networks that are at the root of the development of champagne brands.
You could say these commercial travelers were great ambassadors of the brand and were even businessmen. Beyond being the ambassadors of the brand, they were true businessmen, as once again some of them became majority shareholders for the brand they were representing.
Amongst them were many Germans whose talent, precision, and effervescent wine culture will make them remarkable champagne managers or entrepreneurs. The century embraces the Industrial Revolution. The land is being redesigned thanks to the railway, which opens up new prospects for this trade. Science and progress improve the quality of the wines. Mechanization and later electricity improves working conditions. Champagne is being drunk in restaurants, and the bourgeoisie, which has been increasing since the revolution, wants this wine and the image, symbolism and success that come with it.
Champagne becomes, conveys, and is the symbol of the values of the time. Great dynamism, great creativity, the opening up of the world, even a bit of madness.
Champagne is flaunted, visible, recognizable. The brand's image is built around the bottle and becomes a stake. They sign their wines. The champagne is branded.
At the end of the day, all the brands are surnames, conveying the notions of excellence and demand that the families had for their wines. They associated their name with it as a form of commitment.
They were the first, I think, the people of Champagne, to understand that this dream drink, this dream wine, needed to be enclosed in an even more beautiful case.
The people of Champagne were the first to seek codes that were immediately recognizable. Color codes, the red line across the label, so that the product could be immediately recognized at the traders. They were very inventive at the time.
The Champagne dream must be embodied and built to their image. The companies call attention to themselves and their names. Charles Camille Heidsieck traveled throughout America during the Second Empire and became known as Champagne Charlie in the American press at the cost of a lot of audacity and bravery. In Reims, a company will stand out by conquering England.
Madame Pommery is also an example of a company which tried to give itself a strong image.
The architecture of her house and her love of arts, with pieces even in her cellars, will create the Pommery style, a style and the taste of the English who chose her wines and who make her brand a success.
Chaque maison va chercher à produire.
Each company tried to produce a champagne with their own distinctive taste, so that the house taste will be associated with the brand.
Le goût maison au nom de la marque.
The brand gives the client a point of reference and the continuity of a taste guaranteed by the blending, the cornerstone of champagne, which draws its quality from the intelligence of its land and its men.
Ça a été une avancée, un atout absolument considérable.
A considerable asset, not only to produce quality wines, but wines which already had style.
Because that's what's important in a dry wine with no year. There can be 30 or 40 wines from different sources, and that, I think, is the genius of Champagne, to have harmonized all these wines.
Blending is not refusing to make a wine. On the contrary, it's the building of a wine, the building of a brand.
It took a century for the companies to master this art that will build their image, taking hold of the inventions of the time. Champagne is an event.
Eugène Mercier had a spectacular cask built, which travelled from Épernay to Paris. It was a bit megalomaniac, but there were extraordinary results for the brand image.
He ordered the first advertising film from the Lumière brothers. The styles started asserting themselves, just like the taste of the champagnes. Champagne was selling all around the land and truly captures the spirit of the budding century. But clouds were building up over the success of champagne. Champagne is imitated, so the companies create a syndicate to fight against the counterfeiters, because things need to be organized to defend this dream, the dream of a whole territory. Champagne must be defended, as must the vines that are now suffering. At the turn of the century, many blights fall upon the Champagne region. Phylloxera, the war, and the crises, blights that are felt throughout the vineyards and must be fought. The Champagne sector must become organized. The phylloxera, a tiny insect that inexorably destroys the vines, requires an emergency response.
It's a true calamity that occurred at that time. You have to realize this. And at that time, there were some incredible initiatives that were taken.
23 champagne companies understood the full scope of the danger and decided to become organized with an association called AVC, Association Viticole Champenoise, or the Champagne Region Grape Growers Association, with the aim of taking charge of the entire reconstruction of the vineyards, both at the technical level and the financial level.
We opted for grafting and not for hybrids. By choosing grafting, we increased the cost of the blending between a rootstock that could resist phylloxera, and we kept the original noble species and didn't have to sacrifice the quality.
The grape growers become organized, structured, and represented, but they are suffering. The still wines that absorb a great majority of their production have all but disappeared, following competition from other regions. The grape growers are now expecting the houses to buy all of their grapes.
The champagne houses were on the front lines and tackled the crisis head-on, resolutely, and thereby unveiled the first grape growers' leaders.
The rules and production area need to be defined. Grape growers and companies agree to put in place measures to fight fraud. The state clumsily legislates on the appellation area, creating tensions that are aggravated by bad harvests. Some traders will be particularly hard hit in 1911.
Les vignerons se retrouvent dans une situation où
the grape growers find themselves in a situation where there is instability surrounding the destination of their grapes, and so there is a need to organize the market for raw materials. All this will focus on the question of demarcation of the Champagne region.
de l'aire géographique de la Champagne délimitée.
The rules and production area need to be defined. Grape growers and companies agree to put in place measures to fight fraud. The state clumsily legislates on the appellation area, creating tensions that are aggravated by bad harvests. Some traders will be particularly hard hit in 1911. The troops are called in.
The crisis highlighted the importance of protecting the territory, and also something that was already important at that time, the need to make sure the wealth that would arise from the value creation on the territory would be shared with the inhabitants of the territory, i.e. the champagne houses and the grape growers.
The appellation problem will finally be sorted 15 years later, after the war.
1914. It's like an earthquake for the town of Reims, which, as we know, was bombed and 3/4 destroyed. It's like an earthquake for the Champagne vineyards, because the front cuts through the appellation area, and just after the conflict, 40% of the vines have been affected. Many houses were damaged above ground. Luckily, there are the cellars, and during the war, the cellars played an important role by giving refuge to the population or for their activities.
The Great War not only partially destroyed a great part of the vineyards. Just before the Great War, the universal consumption of champagne was soaring in the United States as much as in Russia. After the Great War, the general economic model and consumption have changed in nature.
The Great War had wiped out whole markets such as Germany, Russia, which was now Bolshevik, and America, that was discovering prohibition. The Champagne people took their future in their own hands. They fought. The vineyards were rebuilt under the urge of Bertrand de Mun, then president of the AVC and of the trade union. The earth is purified, vineyards redesigned and organized with a decisive approach to quality, health and finances.
The quality of the vines, the quality of the grapes, improved in some way during the difficult times. The fact that we were all focusing on the same aim, the champagne wine, meant that we reached a remarkable level of excellence, specialization and know-how compared to the rest of the world.
The crisis of 1929 makes things even worse and put the Champagne region on its knees. Consumption collapses in the markets that are left and stocks are piling up.
The economic difficulty was such that the partners that are the champagne houses and the wine growers, with the help of the public authorities, will be driven to meet, to discuss, and to make agreements.
The different professions begin to come together. The Champagne Wines Trade Union and the Wine Growers General Union regularly meet up to find solutions to the crisis and will regulate, formalize, and create trusting relationships which will be highly successful. The idea of co-management is creeping into people's minds. It materializes a few years later with the Interprofessional Champagne Wine Committee, which as early as 1941 tries to manage as best they can the considerable amounts demanded by the German occupiers. Champagne must be protected. It is necessary to act and to resist.
The cooperation between professions that appears in 1941 is actually the result of a long process, reaching back to the negotiations about the price of wines since the 18th century. The reconstruction of the vineyards in the 1900s, for a great part under the influence of the Champagne houses, and the crisis of the 30s, which leads to the institutionalization of the balance of power around the negotiation of the price of grapes, sees the creation of the Châlons Commission in 1935. Several levels had accumulated and were finally reorganized in one single institution, which without doubt was the reason for the success. It's not so much a creation as the result of a cooperation. They had become part of the equilibrium in a bi-party vineyard, which is very original in the whole of France.
Whilst it may not have created value, it did contribute to bringing stability and giving guarantees that would allow the champagne houses to take risks and sell their bottles for export. And then the incredible increase in champagne consumption, particularly in France, started a few years later. The Champagne people were able, thanks to this contractual policy and thanks to the interprofessional agreements, to develop their sales with pricing that was adjusted to the French consumers' expectations.
Since the war, the consumption of champagne has increased tremendously. New key players have emerged, and the champagne companies have got closer. The interprofessional procedures enabled the regulation of the sector and reduced the impact of further crises and new challenges. Champagne adapted to maintain its rank.
The more champagne progressed, the more there was a collective demand for a certain level of quality. And so, through interprofessional work, we created quality regulations that also increased to maintain this level of excellence. Because there is no other option for champagne. It must be excellent, and its level of excellence must increase.
They worked hard on the ecological aspect. That's the future. It's their own future that is developing in their economy.
Technical progress at the forefront of innovation continues to improve quality, both of the vines and the cellars. The people of Champagne built their model and reinvented success every day. Led by the Champagne houses, the appellation shines bright, with brands available throughout the world. Its destiny must still be written, drawing upon the energy of its nature and its duality.
Each time, the people of Champagne were able to cope through dialogue.
In the crisis and difficult times, in the end, common interest always wins. There is still a complicity, and the flag is the word Champagne. Everyone holds it high and proud.
The land of Champagne is an austere land, a chalky land. In theory, it's not a joyful area. And yet, it is this area where the most festive, light and joyful wine was created.
And so indeed there was a part of intangible value which was developed thanks to this desirability.
Behind the glitzy facade, there are champagne houses who have extremely sharp commercial policies, who are present on the markets.
And it is done through investments, through the intelligence of continuing to position champagne, once again, as an incomparable wine, unmissable, in a world where, as I say, there is a lot of competition, and not only from effervescent wines.
Champagne is a means of expression. The houses understand this well. A tale that is constantly being written, passing expectations of dreams and audacity. A legend that needs to be maintained.
It's true that champagne will never go out of fashion, and it's a bit of a mystery because this is true throughout the world. Champagne has become a legend.
Champagne is intact, unscathed, it's travelling, it's not been damaged.
It remains an emblem of France. It remains an emblem of the party. It remains an emblem once again of pleasure and of sharing.
We must remain faithful to this image that has established itself since the 18th century of a product of excellence, an intelligent product.
It's all these generations, these skills, these passions, these desires of the men and women that ended up in the wine that we have the pleasure of drinking nowadays.
We work to ensure champagne is always desired.
The heads of wine cellars are very contemporary. They of course are inspired by history, but they move forward in life in a very modern way, which creates very modern wines. So this, finally, you know, Porsche used to say, a great classic will always be avant-garde. This can be applied to champagne.
Champagne is a complete art, a party for the eyes, a party for the ears, a party for the palate, and a party for the mind, and even a party for the soul and the heart, so you really get it all. Thank you.